Adunola stood up from the wheelchair. The room stopped breathing. 70 people in their finest Lagos evening wear, champagne in hand, conversations half finished, all of it suspended in the single second it took for a woman who had not walked in 6 months to arise from her chair, straighten her spine, and remove her dark glasses. Femi's speech died in his throat. Adunola looked at her husband with eyes that had never been blind, and she said, "My turn." But we are getting ahead of ourselves. To understand what happened in that room, you need to understand what happened before it. You need to go back 8 months to a Tuesday evening in Victoria Island, to a restaurant window, and to the exact moment Adunola Service decided that the most dangerous thing she could do was pretend to be powerless. She had built everything herself. The tech startup she launched from a 2-room office in Yaba, the team of 60 she assembled over 4 years, the 200 million naira deal that closed on a rainy Thursday morning when she signed her name at the bottom of a page and handed over something she had poured her entire life into. She had done all of it before she turned 35, before the marriage, before she learned that the man sleeping beside her had been calculating the distance between her wealth and his access to it from almost the very beginning. Her name in Lagos meant something. She had made sure of that. Femi came into her life at a friend's dinner and made her laugh 3 times before the starter arrived, which was 2 more times than most men managed in an entire evening. He was in real estate, comfortable but not wealthy, and he had a way of listening that made her feel like the most important person in the room. She married him in Ikoyi with 20 guests and no fuss, and for 2 years she was happy, in the specific, quiet way of a woman who has stopped waiting for the other shoe to fall. Then the other shoe fell. It started small. Tuesday night that stretched past 11. A phone screen tilted away when she walked into the room. An answer that came half a second too late to be casual. She noticed all of it and said nothing, because Adunola had not built a 200 million naira company by reacting before she had information. She requested the call log from their shared phone plan, a number she did not recognize. 43 minutes on a Wednesday night when Femi told her he was in a meeting with a client in Aja. She wrote the number down and went to bed. She was pulling into a parking space in Victoria Island the following Tuesday, early for a client lunch, when she saw them. Femi and Teniola, her personal assistant, 26 years old, excellent at her job, leaving a restaurant together. His hand was on the small of Teniola's back. She said something and he laughed, and then he leaned in and kissed her temple the way a man kisses a woman he is completely comfortable with. Adunola sat in the car and watched for 90 seconds. Then she started the engine and drove home. She did not go to the client lunch. She did not call Femi. She sat in her kitchen and drank a full glass of water and let the feeling move through her completely. The specific nausea of betrayal, the heat of it, the way it reorganized everything you thought you knew about your own life. She gave herself that 1 glass of water to feel it. Then she set the glass down and started planning. She called her best friend Wumi that evening. "Tell me exactly what you saw," Wumi said. His hand on her back. He kissed her temple. "Adun." "I am not crying about it, Wumi. I am thinking." A pause. "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking that I need a lawyer before I need a confrontation." She confirmed the affair twice more before she moved. A hotel receipt folded into a jacket she was sending to the dry cleaner. She was not snooping, she was being a wife, which was the unbearable irony of it. A message on Teniola's unlocked phone left face up on the kitchen counter. Last night was everything, and Femi's number at the top of the thread. She stood in her own kitchen and read it and felt the temperature of her resolve drop until it was completely cold. She fired Teniola on the following Monday. Professional, clean, full severance, no accusations. Teniola looked surprised. Femi, watching from the doorway, looked relieved. Adunola catalogued both reactions and said nothing to either of them. If you are watching this and you are not yet subscribed, do it right now. Like this video and drop your city in the comment, because what this man does next is something you will not believe. Keep watching. She met Barafola Shode Coker that Thursday. Private office, door closed, no associate seated at the table. He is cheating, Adunola said. I have documentation, but I think it goes further than that. She slid a folder across the desk. Read, Folashade said. Different how? The first time was casual. The second time, when I said no, he looked at me for a moment before he smiled. Just a moment, but I have been watching him for weeks and I know what his face looks like when he's recalculating. She paused. I want cameras in my home, voice recorders, everything legally documented. Folashade looked at her. It is your home. You are entitled. But Adunola, this kind of evidence takes time to build. I have time, Adunola said. She had the cameras installed within the week, a decorative clock in the sitting room, a shelf arrangement in the study, voice-activated recorders under the bed frame and inside the base of the lamp on Femi's side of the bed. She did the placement herself with Segun, a private investigator Folashade trusted, on a Thursday afternoon when Femi was showing a property in Lekki. She pressed the record button on the lamp-based device and sat back on her heels on her own bedroom floor and looked at the room, her house, her marriage, and she thought, now we will see who you actually are. 3 weeks later, the recorder answered her. She was in the back garden reading when she heard Femi's voice through the open window above her, low and careful, the voice he used when he thought no one was paying attention. She is not going to sign it willingly, he said. I know Adunola. She has to be in a position where she cannot resist. A pause. Someone on the other end. Power of attorney, Femi said. Once that transfers, everything else follows. The accounts, the property, all of it. Another pause. I have a plan. Just get the documents ready. Adunola sat very still in the garden. A bird moved somewhere in the hedge. The evening traffic on the road outside moved the way it always did, indifferent, unhurried. She stood up, walked inside, poured herself another glass of water and called Folashade. I need to move faster, she said, and I need to tell you about an idea, a big one. How big? Folashade asked. Adunola set her glass down. I want to have a car accident, she said, a fake one. The planning took 6 weeks. Folashade brought in Segun to handle the documentation chain. Dr. Yetunde Afolabi, a woman Adunola had known since their university days in Ibadan, agreed to manage the medical side, the diagnosis, the prognosis, the carefully worded reports that would hold up under scrutiny. A trusted driver staged the crash on a quiet road in Ajah on a Sunday morning. Controlled impact, enough damage to be convincing. Adunola walked away from it without a scratch and was in a hospital bed in a private clinic in Lekki by afternoon, officially blind in both eyes and partially paralyzed from the waist down. The doctor told Femi in the corridor. Adunola lay still in the bed and listened through the cracked door. He cried.
She heard him. The sound of it, ragged and genuine, pressing against the wall outside her room. She lay on her back and stared up his ceiling and let it land. It was the most confusing moment of the entire plan, that crying, because it sounded real. It sounded like a man who loved his wife. She counted. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Then it stopped, and she heard him on the phone, voice already steadying, already transactional. She's in bad shape, he said. Yeah, no, it doesn't look good. A pause. We may need to move faster than we planned. Adunola closed her eyes. There it was. He brought her home 2 weeks later. Wheelchair, full-time nurse, the works. He held her hand at the dinner table and cut her food into small, careful pieces and spoke to her in the soft, deliberate voice people use with the very sick or the very old. He was attentive and present and tender in a way that made her stomach turn, because she understood now that this was not love. This was performance. This was a man maintaining an asset. For 2 weeks, he kept it up without breaking. Then, on a Thursday night, 18 days after she came home, she heard the front door open at 11:30 and a woman's heels clicking across the marble floor downstairs. Adunola lay in the dark and did not move. She heard muffled voices, a laugh, the guest room door closing. She stared at the ceiling and breathed slowly and thought about the camera she had had Segun reinstall in the downstairs corridor before she was discharged, angled to cover the sitting room and the guest room entrance. She thought about the voice recorder under the bed in that room, which she had placed herself on the afternoon Femi was at his office, moving through her own house in the dark, glasses and the wheelchair, navigating the corridors she had memorized, doing what needed to be done. She thought about patience. She stayed still. Over the next 3 weeks, the picture assembled itself with brutal clarity. There was not one woman, there were 3, rotating through the house with a casualness that told Adunola everything about how safe Femi felt. He was not sneaking, he was not careful, he moved through the rooms of her home like a man who had already inherited it, already redecorated it in his mind, already decided what he was keeping and what he was throwing out. She watched the footage each morning on a small encrypted tablet Segun had set up for her, earphones in, face blank, sitting in the garden where the nurse thought she was taking air. She watched Femi pour wine for a woman in her kitchen using her good glasses. She watched him sleep in her bed with the door open. She watched him stand at her window in the morning looking out at her garden with an expression of quiet, settled ownership. And she made notes. Dates, times, names where she had them. Then, in month 2, the phone calls resumed and the recordings caught everything. The power of attorney documents are ready, a man's voice said. Standard form. Once she makes a mark on the page, it holds. Femi said, she still has movement in her right hand. The doctor confirmed it. I just need the right moment. What about the Abuja facility? He replied, I have already spoken to them. Private, completely discreet. Once she is placed there, the visiting schedule is controlled by the next of kin. He paused. By me. And the accounts transfer automatically once the POA is filed? Everything. The investment accounts, the property portfolio, the business residuals. A short silence. She built something significant, I will give her that. But she built it and she married me. And those 2 decisions together are going to make me a very comfortable man. Adunola listened to this recording in Folashadi's office with the door closed and the blinds drawn. She played it twice. Then she set the tablet down on the desk and looked at her lawyer. He is going to warehouse me in Abuja, she said, like furniture he does not want anymore but cannot throw away. Folashade said nothing for a moment. Then, we have enough to file criminal charges right now, today. Not yet, Adunola said. There is someone else I am waiting for. Before we go further, if this story is gripping you, smash that like button, subscribe to this channel right now and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop your city in the comments below. Where in the world are you watching this from? Now back to Adunola because her own sister is about to walk through that door. Bimpe arrived in month 3. She came to the house in Ikoyi on a Saturday morning carrying a bag of fruit and wearing the soft expression of a woman who had rehearsed her entrance. She sat beside Adunola's wheelchair and took her limp hand in both of hers and looked at her with eyes full of careful sorrow. Sis, she said quietly, I am here. Whatever you need, I am not going anywhere. Adunola stared straight ahead, the way a blind woman would, and said nothing. Bimpe stayed for the weekend. She cooked. She sat with Adunola in the garden and talked at her in the gentle, one-sided way people talk to someone they believe cannot respond meaningfully. She told her about her mother's health, about a trip she had taken to Abuja, about a man she was seeing who was not serious enough but she was enjoying the company. She held Adunola's hand and stroked it and said, You are going to be okay, I promise. Family is everything. Adunola felt the words land in her chest like something sharp. She said nothing. She stared at the garden. She stored the feeling away in the place where she was keeping everything else that could not afford to become emotion yet. 2 weeks later, the camera in the sitting room caught them. It was midnight. Adunola was in bed, supposedly asleep. Bimpe had stayed late after dinner, and Femi had poured both of them a drink after the nurse had retired for the evening. The footage showed them standing close at the kitchen island. Not touching, not yet, but close in the way of people who had already crossed a line somewhere private and were now simply being careful about where the cameras might be, except they did not know about the cameras. Femi said, "She does not respond to anything anymore. The nurse says she sleeps most of the day. She is essentially gone already." Bimpe looked towards the corridor, then back at him. "Are you sure she cannot hear any of this?" Femi said, "She is upstairs. She is blind and she can barely move. What is she going to hear?" He set his glass down. "The papers are ready. I just need the right moment to get the mark on the page." "And after?" Femi said, "Abuja facility by the end of the month. After that, everything is clean. The accounts, the house." He glanced at her. "We split it as agreed." Bimpe was quiet for a moment. She turned her glass slowly on the counter. Then she said, "Make sure my name is nowhere near the legal documents, Femi. I mean it. I want clean distance." Femi smiled at her. "You worry too much." She looked up at him and something passed between them in the footage. Something that had clearly passed between them before. And then Femi leaned across the counter and kissed her. Not a quick kiss, a slow, familiar one. The kind that does not need to announce itself because it has happened enough times to feel ordinary. Adunola watched this footage alone the next morning, sitting in Folashade's car in the car park outside the office building because she had not trusted herself to watch it inside where someone might see her face. Her sister. She rewound it once, watched it again from the beginning, then she sat back and looked at the car park and the ordinary morning traffic beyond it, and she let herself feel it, the full weight of it, the particular devastation of a betrayal that comes from inside your own blood, and she gave herself exactly 7 minutes. Then she called for Lashade. "Add Bimpe to the charges," she said. "Everything you have on Femi, build the same wall around her. I want her standing in it when it falls." A pause. "Adunola," Femi said, "she kissed him in my kitchen, in my house, while I was upstairs." Her voice did not shake.
Ada, month 5 day, and Adunola began to build the trap. Folashade spread everything across the conference table on a Tuesday morning. 6 months of recordings, phone logs, the fraudulent power of attorney documents, financial records showing Femi's repeated attempts to access her accounts, the communications with the Abuja facility, and a separate file on Bimpe that was thinner but no less damning. "This is enough to put him away," Folashade said. "We can walk into court tomorrow." "No," Adunola said. "I want one moment, one room, everything at once." She looked at the files on the table. "I want him standing in the middle of a room full of people who respect me, thinking he has already won, and I want to take it all from him in a single breath." Folashade studied her for a long moment. "What kind of room?" "A party," Adunola said, "a celebration of my survivor. His idea, he will think, his stage." She paused. "I will design every inch of it." The invitations went out 3 weeks later under Femi's name because she let him believe it was his idea, his moment to be photographed as the devoted husband before the narrative changed. She watched him throw himself into the arrangements with the energy of a man who believed he was hosting his own coronation. He hired a decorator. He approved a menu. He stood in the sitting room one evening looking at the layout and said to the nurse, she would have loved planning something like this, with the practiced sadness of a man who had already moved his wife into the past tense. Adunola sat in her wheelchair 3 feet away and heard every word. She said nothing. On the evening of the party, she dressed herself. The nurse helped with the buttons, but Adunola chose the outfit, chose the jewelry, chose everything. A deep burgundy dress that she had bought 6 months before the accident and never worn, and which she had specifically saved for this night. She sat in her wheelchair in front of the mirror and looked at her own reflection for a long moment, dark glasses on, hands folded, picture of stillness, and she thought about every morning she had lain in that bed, listening to her husband's life continuing cheerfully around her absence, every recording, every name, every midnight conversation in her kitchen between 2 people who thought she was already finished. She thought about Bimpe's hand stroking hers in the garden. Family is everything. She picked up her dark glasses and put them on. I am ready, she told the nurse. The guests arrived at 7. 70 people, her circle, her colleagues, women she had mentored, old friends who had known her before Femi and would know her long after. Umi arrived early and took a seat in the front row without being asked, because Umi had known something was coming for 3 months and said nothing and asked nothing, only showed up when called and done exactly what she was told, which was why she was the best friend Adunola had ever had. Bimpe arrived at 7:15 in a yellow dress, warm and radiant, moving through the room with the ease of someone who believed the evening was already hers. She greeted people by name. She laughed at the right moment. She stopped beside Adunola's wheelchair and bent down and kissed her cheek and said, "You look beautiful tonight, sis. I am so proud of how far you have come." And Adunola felt the kiss land on her cheek like a small cold stone and said nothing and stared straight ahead. Femi was magnificent. There was no other word for it. He moved through the room with the grace of a man entirely at home in his success, shaking hands, accepting condolences about the difficult season, deflecting praise with a modest wave. He had bought a new suit. He had cut his hair that afternoon. He looked like a husband. He looked like a good man. At 8:15, he stepped to the front of the room and the conversations quieted. He said, "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. 6 months ago, I almost lost the most important person in my life. Watching Adunola fight through what she has faced has reminded me every single day what strength looks like, what grace looks like." He paused, let the silence hold. "She cannot stand up here and tell you tonight, but I want her to know and I want all of you to witness that I am here. I have always been here and I am not going anywhere." The room applauded. Umi did not clap. Adunola noted this from behind her dark glasses and felt something close to love for her friend. Then Adunola's hands closed around the wheels of her chair. She pushed forward slowly at first, cutting through the center of the room, and people stepped aside without understanding why, moved by some instinct that something was shifting. She rolled to the center of the space, directly under the main light, and she stopped. And then she stood up. The room went silent in the specific way that rooms go silent when something impossible happens in front of witnesses. Not a gasp, not a scream, just a sudden total stillness, like the air itself stopped moving. Femi stared at her. His face did not yet know what expression to wear. Adunola reached up and removed her dark glasses. She looked at her husband with clear, steady eyes and said, "Thank you for that, Femi. I have a few things to add." She nodded once towards the back of the room. The screens on either side of the space came to life. His voice first. She is not going to sign it willingly. She has to be in a position where she cannot resist. The Abuja facility, the power of attorney document, his lawyer's voice laying out the transfer of her accounts, her property, her business residuals. Then the women, their voices, their laughter inside the rooms of a house that belonged to Adunola. Then Bimpe, the midnight kitchen. Make sure my name is nowhere near the legal documents. The kiss, slow, familiar, ordinary. The room watched without breathing. A woman near the window began to cry quietly. A man Adunola recognized as one of Femi's business contacts stood very still with his drink halfway to his mouth and did not move it. Wumi sat in the front row with her hands folded in her lap and her jaw set and her eyes full of grief that had nowhere useful to go. Femi had gone the color of old concrete. He was not looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at Adunola. Bimpe had one hand pressed flat against the wall behind her as though the building itself might tilt. When the recordings ended, the room stayed silent for a full 5 seconds. Then Adunola turned to face her husband and the silence stretched 1 second further. "I built every naira you tried to steal," she said. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "Every account, every property, every contact in this room. I did that before you and I will rebuild anything you touched after you." She reached into the fold of her dress and produced an envelope. The man standing beside Fola Shade at the edge of the room stepped forward and took it from her. "You have been served." 2 more men in dark jackets moved quietly through the crowd. Femi opened his mouth. "Do not," Adunola said. One word, he closed it. She turned to Bimpe. Bimpe pushed off the wall. "Adon, please, please, just let me." "You held my hand. You sat in my garden and stroked my hand and told me family was everything." Her voice remained level, but something moved behind her eyes, something that had been stored for a very long time in a very controlled place and was now being released in a single precise stream. "You did that while planning to put me in a facility in Abuja and divide my estate with my husband." She looked at her sister for a long moment. "We are finished. Do not call me. Do not come to my house. We are done." Bimpe's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Adunola turned back to the room. 70 people standing in complete stillness, watching a woman reclaim her life in real time. "Thank you all for coming. The food is excellent. Please enjoy the rest of your evening." The divorce finalized 3 months later. Femi left the marriage with nothing. The prenuptial agreement held on every point and Folashade had made sure of it. He faced 2 criminal charges. His lawyer was charged alongside him. Bimpe's name appeared in the conspiracy filing and she spent 4 months in a legal battle that cost her everything she thought she was protecting. Adunola did not watch any of it unfold. She was already building. The book came out 8 months after the party. She called it The Woman Who Played Dead. It sold out its first printing in 9 days and went to a second print before the month was out. She did not write it with bitterness. She wrote it with the same cold clarity that had settled in her chest in that Victoria Island parking lot. Precise, honest, without self-pity. The foundation she launched the same month she named Fitila, the Yoruba word for lamp. Legal support, financial counseling, emergency documentation services for women facing coerced asset transfer and financial abuse. In its first year, it reached women across 7 states. In its second year, it opened an office in Abuja, which Adunola chose specifically and deliberately and with great satisfaction. It was at a Fitila fundraising dinner 1 year after the party that a man named Toby crossed the room. Not rushing, not performing, just walking directly the way a man walks when he has decided to do something and is doing it. "You are Adunola Savage." He said, "I am." "Your book read twice." He paused. "The second time I took notes." He held out his hand. "Toby Adegokun." She looked at his hand, then at his face. There was nothing calculated in it, no performance, no positioning, just a man standing in front of a woman he wanted to meet and saying it plainly. She shook it. "Can I get you a drink?" he said. She looked at him for a moment the way she looked at everything now, completely, carefully, without hurry. Then she said, "You can." She did not fall that evening. She was not the woman she had been, the one who married on feeling and extended trust before it was earned. But she picked up her glass and she turned to face him and she allowed herself, for the first time in a very long time, to simply be present. In a room she had built, at an event she had chosen, surrounded by a life that was entirely, completely, irrevocably hers. Outside, Lagos moved the way it always did, loud and indifferent and relentless, unbothered by anyone's private war. But Adunola Savage had fought hers quietly, in the dark, from a wheelchair with her eyes wide open. And she had won every single thing. If this story kept you until the very end, smash that like button right now, subscribe to this channel and turn on your notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. And drop your city in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one. See you in the next story.